Every car brand has its legends. But sometimes there are models that just don't seem to fit the brand's DNA. Odd, risky, even out of place. Even Porsche, known for its rear-engine sports cars, once created such a car. This is the Porsche 924, a vehicle designed to be affordable for everyone. So, what came of it? And why is it still called not a real Porsche? Let's find out.
Porsche. Nothing even comes close.
The story of the Porsche 924 really begins with the earlier 914 model. The 914 was a joint creation of Volkswagen and Porsche, born in the late 1960s as a result of close cooperation between the two companies. At that time, they were connected not only by business interests, but also by family ties. Ferdinand Piëch, one of Porsche's key executives, was the grandson of Volkswagen's founder. There were two main versions of the 914. The budget one came with a 4-cylinder Volkswagen engine, while the more expensive version used the 6-cylinder engine from the iconic 911. The 6-cylinder cars were finished by Porsche and sold under the Porsche badge. The 4-cylinder ones were handled by Volkswagen and sold as Volkswagens everywhere, except in the United States, where they were simply marketed as a cheaper Porsche. However, neither Volkswagen nor Porsche achieved their goals with this car. Build quality turned out to be mediocre, yet the price was high, far higher than buyers expected. And the 6-cylinder version cost almost as much as a real Porsche 911. In the end, Volkswagen still managed to profit from the arrangement, but Porsche did not. It's no surprise that Volkswagen wanted to try again. In 1972, Volkswagen approached Porsche with a request to develop a front-engined coupe with rear-wheel drive. This time, Porsche acted clearly as a subcontractor, and the final product was supposed to be sold exclusively under the Volkswagen name. The result was a prototype known internally as EA425. But then the energy crisis hit. Volkswagen suddenly abandoned the project in favor of developing its own front-wheel drive Scirocco, which was cheaper and easier to bring into production. On top of that, by 1974, Volkswagen was facing financial losses and looking to cut investments wherever possible. As a result, the almost finished EA425, developed by Porsche up to the level of working prototypes, was left without a future under its original customer. Meanwhile, in Stuttgart, Porsche's own engineers were working on a completely different prototype, a luxury sports car with a V8 engine. But the same energy crisis and shrinking markets, especially in the Middle East and North America, forced Porsche's leadership to rethink their plans. They looked again at that abandoned Volkswagen project, EA425. Porsche decided to buy back the rights from Volkswagen, and remarkably, the deal still left them in the black. It cost Porsche less to acquire those rights than Volkswagen had originally paid Porsche for the development work. The goals for Porsche were clear: to reach a new audience of younger, less wealthy, but still eager and paying customers, and to finally replace the struggling 914 with something better. In November 1975, Porsche presented a new car to the press in the south of France, and the 924 immediately caused a sensation. For the first time in Porsche's history, the engine was in the front, and for the first time, it used liquid cooling instead of air. For a company famous for its rear-engine cars, that was a big change. But the unusual solutions didn't stop there. Even with the engine in the front and power going to the rear wheels, the gearbox and differential were placed in the back, connected by a long torque tube. This gave the car an almost perfect weight balance. And because Porsche didn't have a suitable engine ready, they turned to Audi. Developing a new engine from scratch would have been too long and too expensive, so they borrowed a 2-liter unit from Audi, upgraded it mechanical fuel injection and a new cylinder head, and raised the output to 125 horsepower. That wasn't earth-shattering, but it was enough for 0 to 60 in 9.6 seconds and a top speed of 204 kilometers per hour, very close to a basic 911, while costing about 1.5 times less. The body also looked nothing like a classic Porsche. It was a low coupe with a long, flat nose and a huge, curved glass hatch. There wasn't enough space for regular headlights, so they went with hidden pop-up lamps. Production was set up in Neckarsulm at a former NSU plant owned by Audi. And for many brand purists, that was just too much. A Porsche with an Audi engine, coil springs up front, drum brakes in the rear. It didn't feel like a real Porsche to them. But the company needed new customers, people who loved the badge, but couldn't afford a 911. That's why the 924 was offered not only with a 4-speed manual, but also with an optional automatic. It was different, even controversial. But by 1977, more than 25,000 of them had been sold. By the late 1970s, it had become clear that turbocharging wasn't just a gimmick for rally prototypes. It was a serious solution for production cars. Porsche didn't stand aside. In 1978, the Porsche 924 Turbo was born. Its 2.0-liter turbocharged engine produced 170 horsepower, 45 more than the naturally aspirated version. To make sure all that power didn't turn into a braking disaster, disc brakes were installed both front and rear. This was a step toward making the 924 feel like a real sports car, not just the cheap Porsche. But Porsche didn't stop there. In 1982, the 944 debuted. At first glance, it looked like a close cousin of the 924, but underneath it was a different machine. The new 2.5-liter engine was designed entirely in-house by Porsche, unlike the 924's 2.0-liter unit, which was essentially a tuned-up Audi inline-4. Visually, the 944 stood out with its wider fenders and more aggressive stance. Inside, it felt more refined and better equipped. Buyers noticed the difference and responded with enthusiasm. Still, the 924 remained in demand. By early 1982, over 100,000 units had been built, and sales continued. The turbo version, however, was soon discontinued. Its turbocharger proved to be finicky and high maintenance. But the base model lived on, receiving the 944's updated interior, better sound insulation, and a new polyurethane rear spoiler. By the mid-1980s, Porsche began winding down production of the lower-powered 924. They knew the entry-level model needed more character to survive. So in 1986, they introduced the 924S, now equipped with the same 2.5-liter engine from the 944, but in a lighter body. Power output was 150 horsepower at launch, then increased to 160 in 1988. In some conditions, the 924S was even quicker than the 944, thanks to its lower weight and simpler setup. Meanwhile, the 944 itself kept getting stronger, especially in turbo trim, which pushed 220 horsepower. That was just 11 horsepower short of the base 911 of the same era. For the first time, these front-engine Porsches were starting to encroach on the territory of their rear-engined sibling in both performance and attitude. It was the Porsche 944 Turbo that won the 24-hour Nelson Ledges race in Ohio by an incredible 42-lap margin. Around that same time, the company opened its American branch, Porsche Cars North America. No surprise there. Statistics show that about 30% of all 924s were sold in the US. The wrong layout didn't stop the 924 from racing at Le Mans, and in the World Sports Car Championship either. Sure, the GTR, GTS, and GTP variants were heavily modified, but on paper, they were still 924s. Over a 12-year production run, around 150,000 cars were built. Most of them, over 120,000, came with a simple naturally aspirated 2.0-liter engine. That's what made the 924 one of the most affordable true sports cars of its time. A real Porsche that didn't require selling your soul. And even though for years, purists looked down on it as not a real Porsche, today, the 924 is seen as a classic. A car that introduced thousands to the Porsche world. A car that changed the company's philosophy, even if it caused internal controversy. Because you know what? Even if the engine is in the front, even if it's borrowed from Audi, even if what you have is an underrated compromise, not a cult icon, if you do it right, you're still a Porsche. If you enjoyed this story, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. More stories are coming about cars that were wrong and yet became legends.
Porsche. Nothing even comes close.